Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to Analyst presented to you by Vajiram and Ravi. Here we discuss 7 articles in 2 different sections taken from 2 newspapers, The Hindu and Indian Express, consolidating your current affair preparation for UPSC at one place. In the first analysis section, we discuss India-Iran relationship. We discuss this in light of 75 years of establishment of diplomatic relationship between the two ancient civilizations. Next up, we discuss when courts step in, necessary justice or judicial overreach. We discuss this in light of recent Delhi High Court judgment regarding asking government to reduce GST on air purifiers. In the next simplified section, we discuss 5 articles from the perspective of prelims 2026 with a lot of value addition, so stay tuned. Starting with the first topic, India-Iran relationship. We discussed this in the context of an article appearing in the Hindu newspaper by none other than the ambassador of Islamic Republic of Iran to India, where he is commemorating the 75 years of diplomatic relationship being established between India and Iran. He discusses this in the context of the historical ties between these ancient civilizations of the world. We are discussing this in the context of our syllabus of GS paper 2, where we discuss about the bilateral relationship of India with other countries. Also, it caters to the part of India's relationship with the other neighborhood countries. When Jawaharlal Nehru wrote the Discovery of India book, he writes that no other people in the world are as closely aligned in origin and in historical relationship than the people of India and Iran. And when he said that, it could not have been more true. This is because there is perhaps a commonality of the origin between both the nations as well as their people. It is believed, although there are various theories regarding the Aryan migration theory, but according to one theory, it is said that Aryans migrated from Central Asia, while one branch settled in what is today's Iran. It settled in those Iranian highlands. One of those tribal branch of Aryans, they settled in the alluvial plains which are very fertile in the region of Ganga Yamuna plains. And that became the origin of the two nations. Then if we discuss the etymological basis of Iran as a nation, the word Iran is perhaps also somewhat related to the word Aryan. So the name of Iran perhaps is driven from the common word of Aryan, which is dictating the demography of both the nations. If we discuss about the historical example, the literary source of which is Rig Veda and the Zen Avesta book, which is the most pious book of the Zoroastrian religion of Iran, we see a lot of commonality between the words and the vocabularies that these two books are using. For example, we see the word Soma and Homa. While Soma is written in Indian book of Rig Veda, which is depicting a very good medicinal plant, the same word is written as Homa. There is commonality between both the names. We see the Varuna is the god of water in Indian mythology, whereas in Persian literature, it is believed that it is a god of Ahura Mazda. So this showcases that both of them worshipped nature. We see mentioning of Manu as a common progenitor of both the races. We see them as somewhat a common descendant. We, all of us Indian and Iranians, somewhat trace our genealogy to the god Manu, and it is common to both these nations. If we discuss beyond this mythology and religion, in historical context, there have been multiple interactions between India and Iran. We saw the invasion of Persian Achaemenid Empire being done by the Darius ruler in the 516 BC. He actually annexed few of the regions of northwest India, for example regions of Punjab and Sindh. It actually became a satrapi or a province of the Iranian Achaemenid Empire. It was actually named as the 20th of the 28 satrapies that this Achaemenid Empire had. The 20th province or the 20th satrapy was Punjab and Sindh. Even his successor, the ruler Xerxes, actually deployed Indians against his invasion of Greeks because he trusted Indians and their martial capacity. If we talk about the art and culture aspect, there is a commonality between the Achaemenid pillars as well as the pillars used by the Mauryan architecture. Both of them were very shiny and lustrous. Both of them used animal capital on top. Both of them used lotus as a motif. So there is a lot of commonality that exists between the culture and architecture of Iran and India. We see a common shared heritage in area of language also. The language of Persian is actually driven from Persia, driven from Iran. but it is enriched by Indians. For example, one of the most famous scholar of Persian is Mirza Abdul Qadir Dehlavi, where the Dehlavi in his name, the title suggests that he belonged to Delhi, or which was called as Delhi earlier. This person, being an Indian, enriched the language of Persian. And why not? Because before 1835, before the East India Company actually changed the official language of India from to English, it was actually Persian. Persian was the lingua franca of India. If you have heard the common term, common idiom in Hindi, which is called as "padhe likhe ko Farsi kya," that means for an educated person, it is very common and expected that they would know the Persian language or the Farsi language. That's how commonly intricated, intertwined history we had between India and Iran. And not just at the past, even in present. If we see the demography of India and Iran, we see a very interesting outcome here, that while Iran, we know that, is a Shia majority country. Most of the population there is Shia, and of the global population, 40% of the global Shia population resides in Iran. But interestingly, India is one of the largest habitat or home to the most number of Shia people, where around 9 to 14% of the global Shia population resides within India. So there is a greater interlinkages of people to people ties existing between India and Iran even today. But as we know that the international relation does not only work on the culture and historicity as well as people to people tie, we also need to supplement it with a lot of real politics of India-Iran relationship steps in. For example, we have this political and diplomatic relationship established between India and Iran from 15th of March 1950, when we signed the Treaty of Friendship between India and Iran. After that, we have had lot of positive reaffirmation of same. We have had lot of engagement at the highest level. In the year 2016, Prime Minister Modi visited Iran. In the year 2018, Hassan Rouhani, former President of Iran, visited India. In the year 2024, there was a meeting between Indian Prime Minister and the current President of Iran, Mr. Pezeshkian, at Kazan in Russia in the 16th BRICS Summit. So this frequent meeting, this frequent high level engagement showcases the continuous relevance of India-Iran relationship. And why not? Because it is reflecting India's multi-alignment strategy. We do not engage in any bloc politics but prioritize our own national interest. As we know that Iran is embroiled in a layered conflict with the whole of GCC countries, the Gulf Cooperation countries of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, etc. Also, it has been at loggerheads with the nation of Israel since past few decades. Despite India having good ties with both of these nations, both of these blocs, India maintains its independent relationship with Iran at all costs. If we see the location of India and Iran, we see a history lesson in real politics telling us something about the relationship that it would entail. For example, in Arthashastra, the scholar Kautilya said that a neighbor's neighbor would be your natural ally. And when India's beloved neighbor Pakistan is actually neighbored by Iran from the other side, it is but natural that India and Iran would develop a closely aligned relationship, a relationship based on mutual trust and friendship. And it has been of great strategic significance to India as well. From the geostrategic perspective, Iran is one of the third largest reserve of crude oil in the world. It is catering to around 209 billion barrels of reserve of crude oil is with Iran. And at one point of time, it was third largest crude oil supplier to India. Not just crude, but also the South Faras gas field, India has showcased its interest. Iran is also one of the largest supplier of the fertilizer inducing material, which is crucial for India's food security as well. We have good economic ties, economic relations to the tune of $2.33 billion worth of trade was happening between India and Iran in the year 2022-2023, although it has been on a declining trend. We have shared concern on the security cooperations. India and Iran are cooperating on the matter of Taliban. During the first Taliban rule in the year 2000, India actually was supported by Iran to develop something known as the Northern Alliance, because it provided the logistical support to the groups who were countering Taliban in Afghanistan in the early decades of 2000. India and Iran are cooperating on RATS, which is the regional anti-terrorist structure under the aegis of the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We have shared concern regarding the drug trafficking because Iran is part of the Golden Crescent region, which is bordering India and is a major cause of trouble for India's internal security concerns. We are both fighting the Sunni extremism that is happening in the region by the emergence of organizations like ISIS-K, which is Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, Khorasan province, which is nothing but a region in Afghanistan. We both have a shared interest here to promote regional security. We are showcasing multilateral cooperation between India and Iran. Both of us have contributed to the establishment of BRICS. Now Iran is also a member of the BRICS. Iran is cooperating with India in the part of SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Despite these convergences, India and Iran's relationship are now primarily focused on the connectivity cooperation. India and Iran signed the MOU or Memorandum of Understanding for development of a Shahid Beheshti port in the Gulf of Oman in Iran, which is located near the Chabahar port. It is actually catering to counter the Chinese influence in Pakistan's Gwadar port, which it is being developed under the CPEC program. India is trying to develop this port at Shahid Beheshti port of Chabahar. India is also in understanding with Iran, which is part of the INSTC framework, International North-South Trade Cooperation, which is promoting a way which is beyond the traditional route that goes from the Suez Canal. This route is not just 40% shorter but also 30% more cost efficient. Despite all these talks of cost efficiency and shortness of length, what is more important is that it is not catering, it is not flowing from this very restive region of Israel and Palestine, which is under threat right now. We saw certain attacks happening in the Bab el Mandeb Strait that lies here, which is a very restive region because of instability in Yemen. Because there are also vulnerabilities associated with the only major passage for goods going from India to Europe, because in the year 2022 we saw such ship called as MS Evergreen, which was stuck in the Suez Canal. Now, in absence of any alternative route, it actually disrupted the whole global traffic and led to the loss of billions of worth of dollars. Now, this alternative route would give an alternative to the commerce and trade between these countries, also catering to the energy rich region of Central Asia, giving access to India of their resources and markets. It is also going to help for regional development because in the light of disruption of trade between India and Pakistan, because the trade through the Wagah border, Atari Wagah border between India and Pakistan being closed in the aftermath of various terrorist attacks, it would be allowing an alternate mechanism to access the region of Afghanistan, which would lead to greater trade and commerce between Afghanistan, India as well as other Central Asian nations. So there is a great relevance, there is great need of convergence between India and Iran on this connectivity front, which is crucial for not just the regional growth but also the global economic growth. Moving to the key challenges that exist between India and Iran, there are multiple because there is an issue of strategic balancing that lies in this polarized West Asia region. As we saw that Israel-Palestine issue is again on boil and Iran has often been attacked by missiles from Israel. Moving to the key challenges that exist between India and Iran relationship, it is basically starting from the strategic balancing in a polarized West Asia. We see the geopolitical environment of West Asia being very polarized. We saw the upsurge in the attacks between Israel and Palestine, where Iran is also being targeted by the rockets coming from Israel. We saw a greater strategic convergence rising between Iran, China and Pakistan because of the China's BRI initiative, Belt and Road Initiative, which is catering to the economic desperateness in Iran. Here China is using its economic heft to cater to this need of Iran, which is reeling under the pressure due to the Western sanction after the JCPOA agreement was withdrawn under the Trump administration, which was a joint cooperation plan of action regarding the nuclear development in Iran. When it was this agreement which was now withdrawn, It led to a greater Western sanction happening on Iran. So Iran is itself under economic pressure, and in this situation, China is exploiting this situation of Iran and using to develop a closer convergence between this Iran, China, and Pakistan, which is of course not in favor of India's relationship from the India's perspective. If we see the erosion of energy-centric economic foundation, which was the basis of India-Iran economic ties, it has over the time reduced drastically. We saw in the initial slide that around 11.8% of all the crude that India imported came from Iran in the year 2011, 2012. Over the time period, we have reduced it to negligible levels. India has reduced its Iranian purchase by 92% in the year 2019-2020. The progress in the connectivity aspect has also not been up to the mark. We saw greater delays happening there, and in certain cases like this Chabahar Zahedan railway line, India has completely exited from the financing role because of the pressures at home, because of delays in India's developmental projects. Due to these issues, we are seeing the limited trade expansions happening. Because of this, India-Iran trade ties have dwindled to a very low level. We saw $4.77 billion worth of economic trade happening between India and Iran in the year 2019-2020. It dwindled to $2.33 billion, merely a half of what it used to be. On the other hand, we see a divergence approaches to Afghanistan and regional security architecture. India is not very appreciative of the Iran's approach, where it is using its state mechanism to sponsor certain rebel groups. For example, Iran's support to the Houthi group. It violates the principle of sovereignty, a principle which is foundation of the UN Charter. Since it's violate the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of the nations like Yemen and Israel, India is not able to condone all these actions of Iran, and leads to certain diplomatic challenges arising between both the nations. On the other hand, there are issues of diplomatic sensitivities that arise due to the domestic and religious issues, because a lot of time we have seen statements coming from the side of Iran regarding the Kashmir issue, which are not often appreciated by India, because Kashmir being a bilateral dispute between India and Pakistan, and we would not tolerate any sort of external impression on it. However, despite these challenges, India and Iran, as we discussed, are the natural allies. Thus, there is need for moving forward in this relationship by strengthening the economic basis of it. We can strengthen the economic trade by flexible payment mechanism. We can establish what is known as the local currency exchanges, because Iran is under sanction from West. It cannot use much of the dollars, but rupee real mechanism could again be re-strengthened so that we can manage these external vulnerabilities. There is need for diversification of ties as well. India-Iran relationship cannot be solely developed on the basis of crude and energy ties. They have to be broad-based to include technology-based cooperation. For example, Iran is a leader of nanotechnology as well as the medical sciences, whereas India has great advantage when it comes to the information technology. It allows for mutual cooperation in the field of AI in future, where we are integrating both of these technologies for a common and shared prosperity. We have to move away from this sanction aware but not sanction driven policy. While we are aware that Iran is under sanctions, our decisions are not just driven by these sanctions. We have adopted this strategy with respect to Russia also, where despite sanctions we have been importing certain material of crude oils from Russia. Russia remains the largest supplier of crude oils to India today. Thus, there is a need for preparation for a post-sanction energy re-engagement, where we discuss not just the buy or purchase and sale of these crude oil as well as gas, but also the integration of supply chain at a larger level. For example, we discussed the South Faras gas field. Here, Indian energy refiners, Indian industries could be roped in for greater forward and backward linkages in the whole energy supply chains. We need to move from this transactional relationship to an innovation driven relationship, where we are innovating and collaborating with each other to move forward in the dimension of greater prosperity. We have to ensure that we realize the potential of stable India-Iran relationship in the restive West Asia region, which would be anchoring the stability in this global region. India-Iran relationship, as we discussed, have withstood the test of history throughout the time period of history. They have withstood these challenges of times, so they can withstand the current challenges also to realize this potential of acting as an anchor of stability in the global flux. This was about this topic of India-Iran relationship. We have a mains practice question for you. Kindly write it down and get it evaluated from your mentors. Moving to the next topic, when courts step in, necessary justice or judicial overreach. We discussed this in the light of Delhi High Court's recent intervention in the matter of taxation on air purifiers. It is actually veering very closely to the legislative domain, which is related to the lawmaking. It is catering to our syllabus of GS paper 2, separation of power between various organs. It is often in news that courts in India have taken up the job of adjudicator, where they discuss the relevance or the constitutionality of law that comes under the basis of judicial review. It is actually a power of the court to examine the constitutionality of the legislative and executive actions and determine if they are violating the constitution or not. They derive this power from the Article 13 of the constitution as well as Article 32 and 226, which gives rights to the citizen to move to the High Courts and Supreme Court if they feel that their laws have been violated, their fundamental rights have been violated. And law is what the judges say it is. Thus, the judges reflect on the actual constitutionality of these acts and give their judgments. However, when courts move away from this traditional philosophy, traditional process of just mere adjudication to move towards a favor of progressive and social policies, it is considered as a form of judicial activism. In words of Mr. Upender Bakshi, it leads to development of something known as people's court, where courts go beyond the adjudication to realize the potential of expansion of human rights and delivering greater progressive changes in the society. However, at the other end of the spectrum is another extreme, which is judicial overreach. It is basically a situation when the courts transgress into the domains which are reserved for the legislature or the executive, majorly into the issues which are related to the policy formulation as well as the administration part of it. And there comes the sound of danger. You are moving from judicial review to judicial activism to judicial overreach, which is not appreciated by the constitution, which is not appreciable by the administration as well as the legislature. The broad difference between the judicial review and judicial activism per se, it is that it is a reactive power, whereas the judicial activism is a proactive power. It can even be done suo motu or on a public interest litigation or a PIL. There have been various instances where they have sought to fill the gap and promoted justice in the society, but when it is required in the society because of various reasons, it is even appreciated by the people. For example, in the Vishakha case, which led Supreme Court to lay down guidelines to prevent sexual harassment at workplace. So this is appreciated, but what is happening in this case, the facts of the matter is that a plea reached the Delhi High Court, and under this they asked for reduction of GST on air purifier. Delhi High Court, now hearing this plea, even asked the government, asked them that why this GST on these bills, on these air purifier cannot be reduced from the 18% to the 5%. Now the High Court judges want answers from the government that why they are applying 18% GST and why not 5% GST. Now this is purely a administrative domain. Law in India is very clear on the matter of taxation. As per Article 265 of the Constitution, no tax shall be levied or collected except by the authority of law. Now who would make the law? Of course the parliament would make the law, and they have made this law which is called as the GST, which came by the Constitutional Amendment 101. It established something known as the GST Council, which decides again the taxes, what tax should be imposed on what items. So it is now a purely administrative body that does that under the Article 279A. It is not at all a domain of the courts to know what tax would be levied on what articles. Over the time period, they have themselves reduced the ambit of GST Council. There has been a periodic erosion of the body, because in the Mohit Minerals case of 2022, Supreme Court actually held that the GST Council decision would not be binding anymore, and that has led to several changes in the policies, but that is a matter of discussion for some other day. Coming to this topic, we need to understand that why Supreme Courts and High Courts over the time period have gone away from the aspect of adjudication to the aspect of judicial activism, and how it leads to judicial overreach happening, because when they are transgressing the traditional domain of policy making and legislative law making, how issues are being witnessed in the society. But first of all, what is actually the need of judicial activism? I mean, why do the court even need to step in this domain of legislation or executive in the first place? Why are they allowed to do so, and what is the need for the society to this for this to be happening? Perhaps there are good reasons. The good reasons include that presence of legislative vacuum in India. There would be certain areas where the law has not been made by the legislature, so somebody needs to act, and it is the courts that step in. For example, we discussed the Vishakha case. In the year 1997, Supreme Court, seeing that there is no law in India that could protect women from sexual harassment at workplace, they gave something known as Vishakha guidelines, which then became the foundation for another following act that came, which is known as the Posh Act, that came in very late in 2013. So to fulfill these legislative vacuum, it is required that judicial activism be done. Another reason could be a conflict of interest. Lawmakers are supposed to make the law, but what if the law that they are required to make is in conflict with their individual interest? For example, the issue of criminalization of politics. It might be so that they might be leaving some loopholes in the law that needs resolution by some other body. For example, Supreme Court in the Lily Thomas case actually struck down the lack of immediate disqualification. After this Lily Thomas case, legislatures, this member of parliament, member of legislative assembly, they are now immediately disqualified if they are convicted under the section 8 of the RPA Act. Even in the year 2017, what happened was that Supreme Court allowed for fast track courts to be set up to tackle this issue of criminalization of politics. Now, these things would not be done by the member of parliament or member of legislative assembly themselves, because it is catering to the conflict of interest. They would not want to hurt themselves, so they would not make such law. But making such law is very necessary, so the courts are making such laws. Then it allows for living document. We have seen that Indian constitution is a transformative document. It is a living document. It is breathing as we are breathing. It is witnessing certain changes. But what if certain changes, these changes that the society require, are not forthcoming from the legislature, because there is legislative hesitation? Legislature, being the member of parliament, being the representative of the society, also are not very forthcoming in cases of some progressive legislation. For example, in the year 2014, Supreme Court passed the Nalsa judgment, which is accorded the third gender status to the transgender people. Now, this thing could be done by the MPs also, it could be done by the parliamentarians themselves, but it was not done. Somebody had to do, the courts did. There is issue of cloaked grievance redressal mechanism existing in India. We see that the concerns of the common man or the concerns of the opposition are not heard by the government. It is not heeded to in the parliament also. In such cases, such pleas actually reaches to the Supreme Court and the High Court, and that's where accountability of the executive is enshrined. Although the parliament holds government responsible under Article 75 Clause 3, Council of Ministers is directly responsible to the legislature. But often there are disruptions in the parliament, and such crucial matters of the day could not be discussed in the parliament. For example, recently what happened was that there was a Sanchar Sathi app. There was a lot of hue and cry that it violated privacy issues. There were a lot of discussions, and government actually listened to the grievances of the people, and it actually withdrew the directive that it was mandatory to be installed in the mobile phones. So this mandate was withdrawn. But certainly the similar thing happened 2 or 3 years back when an Arogya Setu app was formulated by government. It also had the same features of violating the privacy of the individuals. And these concerns, when they were raised by the people, government perhaps was not very transparent about it. It did not answer about these concerns. Eventually, this issue of Arogya Setu app, it actually reached the Supreme Court, and the government had to answer there. And eventually, it led to the restoration of rights of the people. In case of Sanchar Sathi, government listened. It did not need to go to the Supreme Court. Where in Arogya Setu, government did not listen, and there was lack of transparency on the part of government. Thus, it had to go through the route of Supreme Court, through the route of judicial activism. Then there is need of progressive upholding of the individual right. What if there is issue of centralization of power happening? Then somebody would have to act as the protector or defender of rights, which is nothing but the Supreme Court, as it did in the Puttaswamy case, where it upheld that the right to privacy is part of the basic structure doctrine. It is part of the right to life per se under Article 21. It leads to the innovation in democracy as well. For example, the idea of basic structure doctrine, although not mentioned in the constitution, although it doesn't come as adjudication, but is rather an innovation, a judicial innovation that has come to our country. It has come through the process of judicial activism, but it has actually preserved the structure of our constitution. It has preserved the essence of our democracy. For these various multifaceted reasons, it is very necessary that judicial activism as a principle should be there in our constitution, and it is valid. But then concerns are so overwhelming. These are some of the examples of judicial activism, although we have discussed them. But the concerns of the judicial overreach are so overwhelming that it leads to questioning of the process itself. We see that this idea of excessive use of judicial activism that translates to judicial overreach, it is violating the idea of separation of power, which was given by the French scholar Montesquieu in his book Spirit of Laws. According to this idea of separation of power, it is said that while the parliament makes the law, executive implements the law, it puts the law into action. The role of judiciary is to make judgments on the law or adjudicate the law. It is something that is enshrined in our constitution also. Under Article 50, it is saying that the state shall take steps to separate the judiciary from the executive. So the clearly demarcated domains should be upheld. However, what happens is that the polycentric issues, when the judiciary is taking up these polycentric issues means basically the issues where multiple center of powers are related. There might be multiple concerns that would be emerging of one single issue. There are polycenters, that means multiple centers. Issue might be one, but its impact would be seen in various dimensions. And this requires a lot of technical expertise, which may not be happening in the case of judges. And it leads to administrative confusion. For example, we saw this happening in the case of 500-meter liquor ban. Now, the central issue here was the road safety. But Supreme Court saw this central issue and passed the judgment that no alcohol vent should be located in the vicinity of 500 meters of the national highway or the state highways. While Supreme Court appreciated the road safety issue, there was lot of polycentric issue here, lot of multiple other circles that must be looked at. For example, the issue of livelihood of these liquor vents, the issue of state revenue coming from these licenses, the issue of ex post facto, because these are valid businesses which are running on the licenses from the government. It is violating their right under Article 19 clause 1, which is right to profession. So these issues must be looked at from the administrative perspective also and cannot be solely done on a courtroom. There is a need of lot of data backed decision making that has to happen, and this is clearly a domain of administration. It somewhat also leads to the tyranny of the unelected. What do we mean by this? While as we saw that the parliament holds the government accountable, the government is actually responsible to the legislature under Article 75 clause 3. But in case of judges, they are not elected, they are appointed by the collegium system. This collegium system is nothing but judges appointing themselves. Then there are issues of representation in the judiciary. We have seen lot of underrepresentation of Dalits, of women in the Supreme Court. So the idea of such cliche of people, such small group of people implementing such wide-ranging decision is not upholding the idea of responsible governance. Thus, they must restrict themselves to their dimension of constitutional adjudication, is what has been often said by the scholars. It is also leading to the problem of docket explosion. What is this docket explosion now? Docket explosion is meaning basically when Supreme Court and the High Courts are furthering into various dimensions, they are losing their control over the primary task of adjudication, and that is why we have these dockets or the documents exploding in country. We see more than 5 crore cases are pending in our courts because Supreme Courts are taking various frivolous PILs regarding the banning of movies, PILs regarding the bringing back of Kohinoor. Such issues are even discussed in the Supreme Courts nowadays. Now then it leads to the docket explosion, it leads to delays in justice, and as we know, justice delayed is justice denied. We also see the problem of policy instability, which is impacting the ease of doing business. Why? Because let's say if there is some changes that are happening on the case of certain taxation is happening, ideally it should be done by the government, and when it would be done by the government, it would be done by multi-stakeholder consultation. Government would seek the industry bodies like FICCI as well as the ASSOCHAM and everything, and would ask their opinion like how much taxation should be there. Now if it would be done as per the judge's interest or judge's mood that day, it will lead to policy instability. It would be a random arbitrary act of taxation which is not catering to the demand of the economy, which is not appropriate from the perspective of global standard. It may lead to the issues in the range of export of such material. It would reduce the export competitiveness, thus reducing the ease of doing business in our country. It is also catering to undoing the positive changes that might be happening in the society or the legislation. For example, we take a case study here. On the 12th of February 2018, an RBI circular came which was catering to the demand of NPAs, the non-performing asset. It was at that time that Indian banks had an NPA of more than 10%. NPA is basically non-performing asset. Any loan that the bank has advanced, if its repayment is not being done, it is considered as non-performing asset. Now, since the issue of non-performing asset was so big, RBI passed a circular that every loan more than worth 2000 crore rupees, if it is delayed by even one day, it should be classified as a non-performing asset, and the company's administration should go to the NCLT for resolution of this case. There should not be any collusive corruption that should be happening between the company as well as the bank officials, so that this should be ideally recognized within one day of default. This was the circular. But Supreme Court thought that this classification on the basis of 2000 crore is arbitrary, and they quashed this circular altogether. They said that this is not ideal, this is violating the right to equality, and that was their judgment. But it did not appreciate that RBI is a technical body. It is a very sound body which knows the nitty-gritties of the issues of NPAs and banking management and the actual collusive corruption that is happening at the ground level. On the other hand, the judiciary sitting in the courtroom hearing arguments of both the sides cannot appreciate these ground level issues, and thus leads to the undoing of the progressive change that could be brought in the credit culture of our society. Thus, these wide-ranging issues arise from the judicial overreach when the judges actually takes the domain of legislature and executive. Thus, there is a wide need of balancing this both aspect of judicial overreach with the judicial activism. And how do we do that? We do that by the basis of judicial restraint. Supreme Court has itself showed us guidelines on how to exercise judicial restraint in various cases. For example, in this DM Aravali Golf Course versus Chandrahas case, Supreme Court held that courts must restrict themselves to adjudicate a law, to decide what the law is saying, is it constitutional or not. They should not try to make the law. That was the precedence here. They have also showcased that we need to apply the principle of institutional competence. Whether the institute who is making this law, is it competent to make the law, and are they socially aware of the realities? This happened in last 2 years in the Supriyo Chakrabarti case. What happened here was, there was a plea, although Supreme Court recognized the third gender under the Lalsa case, but they were not granted the right to marry. Why? Because in this Supriyo Chakrabarti case, Supreme Court refused that there must be a fundamental right to marry, because as per them, it is the domain of the legislature. In India, marriage is not just a contract, it is a sacrament. Thus, the society must be approving the relationship. The whole society must be accepting, and how do we know whether the society is accepting it or not? We must go through the legislative route, where people's representative, these MPs and MLAs, when they are deciding whether to give this right to marry to the people or not. Thus, they exercise this judicial restraint there. There is need for recalibration of this PIL mechanism, so that such frivolous cases should not reach and should not disturb the pace of constitutional adjudication, should not pace the delivery of justice in the more crucial cases. There is need for implementation of NCRWC suggestions here, where they ask for judicial self-restraint being applied. There must be consistency in the judgments. There must be also a provision of separation of court, where PIL could be taken by some other court, whereas a constitutional court could be separated from the original Supreme Court. These suggestions must be taken into mind to ensure that the idea of PIL, the idea of judicial activism, should not give way to judicial overreach, which is violating the letter and spirit of the idea of separation of power. This was regarding this topic. We have this practice question for you. Kindly attempt it and get it evaluated from your mentors. Moving to the next topic, Venezuela's resource curse. We decode the news. Venezuela and USA, they are at loggerhead if we are seeing the news. United States of America has ordered for naval blockade of Venezuela. There have been also seizing of 2 of the ships of Venezuela. Now the Honorable President of USA has asked for quarantining the Venezuelan export of petroleum for 2 months to suppress the economy of Venezuela. While this is happening, we take a look at the oil reserves of Venezuela. If we understand the economy of Venezuela, we see that Venezuela is the largest holder of largest proven reserves of crude oil at 303 billion barrels. While the reserves are the highest, it is not the largest producer of the world. While the reserves are the highest, it is not the largest producer and refiner of oil because of various factors. One of it is that the resources that are present in Venezuela are extra heavy crude oil that require latest machinery, specialized technology as well as capitals, which is not available with Venezuela. Why so? Why do not Venezuela have the capital? We take a look at those issues also. But understanding this news, if we see that earlier in Venezuela there is a company, the public sector oil company, which is PDVSA. It owned various refineries. It produced huge amount of crude oil earlier. But now if we see in the year 2024, the per day capacity of production is 9.21 lakh barrels of crude oil. It is 56% lower than its initial production in the year 1980s. While the world was going through this Yom Kippur war, or the war between the Israel as well as the Arab powers in the year 1973, there was a glut of supply from Venezuela. Venezuela was one of the leading producers then. But after the failed coup attempt, after the rising of military power, after the rise of socialist leaders like Hugo Chavez as well as the current president Nicolas Maduro, who is now the third in his third term as the president of Venezuela, we saw a decline in production happening because of US sanctioning Venezuela, as there are ideological differences with Venezuela's new government because they are perhaps catering to the different ideology of socialism. If we see the number, we see that Venezuela, Saudi and Iran, these are the top 3 having the top 3 reserves of crude oil, while in terms of production it is the US, Russia, Saudi Arabia which ranks at the top, and Venezuela is only ranking at the 16th number. These data, these facts are very important for our prelims exam point of view. We see a lot of question where they have asked that which country is the largest exporter of rice in the world. Now they could ask that which country is the largest producer of crude oil in the world, which country has the largest number of reserves of crude oil. So we must take a great look at this data and try to remember it. If we see in the earlier phase, when in the 1980s, when Venezuela was promoting its glut of crude oil, when USA was also supporting it, its per capita GDP was at this range of around 9,000 per person. After 30 years of growth, it has actually reached the same level. It is perhaps the only country in the world which has actually remained stagnant in terms of GDP per capita. It is perhaps the only country in the world where GDP per capita has remained same as it was 3 decades ago. Why is this happening? Why is US meddling in this nation which is 3,000 miles away from it? And why is it not letting the production of crude oil happening in Venezuela? It has something to do with the history that goes beyond more than 200 years ago. There was something known as Monroe Doctrine that was at play in USA at that point of time, where Monroe was the name of the James Monroe, US president of that time period. He basically promulgated a doctrine that the South America is basically a region of influence of America, of USA, and they would not tolerate any sort of external influence in this region. It was kind of their backyard, and they wanted to keep European intervention out of it. Of course, on the other hand, US would also not meddle into the European European politics, but they would secure their interest in the South American region. After 200 years, the new national security strategy of USA, it is now promoting the same Monroe Doctrine, reviving the 19th century Monroe Doctrine, where it is ensuring that the Western Hemisphere should be the Washington's zone of influence. This whole Western Hemisphere should be the Washington's zone of influence, west of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, because Venezuela is not catering to the ideology of USA today, there have been multiple sanctions that have been imposed in Venezuela, as a result of which there is a lack of capital in Venezuela to extract as much oil as it could from its crude oil reserves. There is no technological cooperation, there is no global cooperation that would allow Venezuela to extract as much. As a result, we saw that Venezuela's GDP per capita has become almost similar to what it was 3 decades ago. No other country's GDP per capita has slid to this extent in this period. We see declining share of Venezuela in the global oil export. Earlier, it used to be around 4% of the global oil used to come from Venezuela. It has now dwindled to merely 0.35%. 0.35%. This is a huge decline. And this is crippling the economy of Venezuela, as we saw in terms of the GDP per capita, but also in terms of its other exports, because Venezuela has not been able to diversify its export away from the crude oil, in which it is very rich. Other issue that is impacting its economy is that there is very high debt to GDP ratio that is happening in Venezuela. Thus, economy is in doldrums and there are high risk of stagflation happening in Venezuela. If we discuss about the prelims pointer from the Venezuela, we see that Venezuela is a country on the north coast of South America. It was in news 2 years ago also, where there was a lot of conflict region in the Venezuela. It was the region of Guayana Essequibo. It is basically a contested region. This Essequibo region is actually under the control of the nation of Guyana, but it is claimed by Venezuela as its own territory. The territory which is along this Essequibo river. If we see the geographical location of Venezuela, it is bounded by Guyana to the east, Brazil to the south, and Colombia to the south and west. It is also sharing a maritime border with the Caribbean Sea as well as the Atlantic Ocean. Thus, it is important to remember these places in news, the conflicted region in the news from a prelims perspective. The next topic is the Great Indian Research Deficit. It is catering to the science and tech part of our GS paper 3. It is written, this article that has appeared in the Hindu is written by the Honorable Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and we have tried to simplify his eloquent English for you. We try to simplify the content and try to explain it to you in the simple manner what this article is talking about. It is basically catering to the aspect of India's huge ambition regarding the innovation and research and development. We are actually the home to 17.5% of the global workforce on the one hand. However, on the other hand, only 3% of the global research output is put forward by Indians. Thus, our huge demographic dividend is not leading to high value research and development is what they are arguing. They say that India is ranked at 6th position globally in terms of patent filings. Among patents, which is basically this utilization of intellectual property, India is ranking at the 6th position in the world despite being the most populous country in the world. Although there have been a progress that has been witnessed here, India's patent filing has grew by 15.7%. It is among the fastest in the top 20 countries. Still, the share of global patent in India is merely around 2% or exactly 1.8%. Despite this growth, we have reached this level. Imagine the circumstances few years ago. India now still ranks in 47th in terms of resident patent filing per million population. The number of patent filed at 65,000 application is high because of large population of India. But in terms of patent per lakh, India is still ranking at 47th place. That means 46 countries are ahead of us in this aspect of research landscape. If we discuss the challenges that are coming in India's research framework is that we are having very low investment in research and innovation. As a percentage of GDP, India is only spending around 0.6% to 0.7% of its GDP on the research and development. Compare that to a nation like Israel where they are spending around 5.4% of their GDP on the research and development, and that showcases in their technological progress, that showcases in their development in field of defense, agriculture, technology as well. If we see other aspect, the nitty-gritty of research spending in India, it is also that the research in India is government dominated majorly. Around two-thirds of all the research funding that happens in India is given by the government, and only one-third is given by the private entities. Compare that to something with the China, the company of Huawei, the whole contribution of one MNC of China, which is Huawei, it was around $23.4 billion. If we compare that to India, it is still higher than the accumulated spending of government as well as private entities put together. This one company is spending more than government of India and the private companies of India put together, and that is why they are leader in the 5G technology, they are leader in the semiconductor technology. These which are the frameworks, which are the basic wheels of the fourth industrial revolution, and India is nowhere on the place. And India is nowhere near this horizon. If we see, there is a poor linkages between universities and research institution with the industry. There is poor industry academia linkages. The researches that are being done in our universities are also lacking their commercial and societal application. They are merely done for degree purposes and not for commercialization purposes. Even if the number of patent filing has increased, even if the number of researchers have increased, the quality of research exposure remains limited, because we do not have the culture of integration of industries with the academia. Our curriculum is very outdated. We see obsolete courses being taught in the BTech courses that we see in our graduate, and that showcases in the degree of employability that we have of engineering graduate, that around more than 50% of engineering graduates in India are not employable at all. Thus, there is also an issue of brain drain, which is affecting the better opportunities and infrastructure which is available to them abroad. So anyone who is genius in their own right, they move to other nations like USA or Switzerland or other nations and should contribute to their development rather than Indian development. This is the issue of brain drain, that is an outcome of this research framework challenges in India. In aggregate, what has happened is that India is merely ranking at 38th position in the World Intellectual Property Organization's Global Intellectual Innovation Index. Under this report, India is ranked at a 38th position, which is the index which is topped by none other than Switzerland. Thus, there are certain challenges with India's research framework that needs to be catered to if we are supposed to reach the high ambition of Viksit Bharat 2047. It's not that the government is oblivious of this. Of course, government has taken a lot of steps. If we discuss the National Research Foundation, Anusandhan Fund has been established in the last year's budget, under which 1 lakh crore has been deployed over 5 years to be promoted this academy and industrial collaboration that we discussed. Atal Innovation Mission has been running by Niti Aayog, where we are catching them young. We are promoting innovation at the school levels. We are teaching them robotics. We are teaching them machine learning. We are teaching them 3D printing right from the school level. We are promoting Startup India, Make in India with a lot of focus on the research and development. This would promote the R&D and innovation in the manufacturing sectors of India, which would enhance the commercialization of the research technologies. We are also promoting a infrastructure in form of a DPI, the digital public infrastructure, through the promotion of idea of BharatNet, which is a commonly available internet broadband connectivity. We are promoting UPI, which is nothing but an innovation in the fintech technology, which is being lauded across the world. We have seen countries like France, UAE using this technology of India, which is acting as a soft power of India's research innovation. Thus, while steps are laudable, there is need for catering to these challenges to ensuring the idea of India as the Vishwaguru. Moving to the next topic, healthcare gets privacy backbone but devils in detail. Here we discuss the impact of DPDP rules which have just been notified by the government and how they are going to impact the healthcare infrastructure in India. This DPDP rules are formulated under the DPDP Act of 2023. It is actually the most significant privacy reform since the IT Act of 2000. What these rules are catering to, basically, they have elevated every clinic, hospital and telemedicine app to the category of data fiduciary. Now it does not differentiate between the level of these organization, between the scale of this organization. All of them have now become given the obligation to treat the data of the patient that walks in them with a lot of respect and lot of care. Why? Because patients have now become the data principals. What are these terms, data fiduciary and data principal? The detailed application of it is given in the DPDP Act that we will discuss in the later slide. Now, what we discuss here is that they have acknowledged, this new rules have acknowledged that while a person, when he walks into a hospital or such establishment, the last thing that comes to their mind is their data protection. The first thing that comes to their mind is survival, basically. Even in such critical scenario, the data protection should not be left out of the window, is what this idea is emphasizing. However, certain emergency mechanism have been given. For example, if informed consent could not be given at the time of emergency services, it should be taken later also. So these are the broader aspect this new rules are talking about. We'll take a deep look at how these are going to impact the healthcare sector. If we discuss the impact of DPDP rules on this healthcare sector, the first thing is that they have now formally recognized that the health data that is there, it is nothing but sensitive personal data. It is one notch higher than the personal data. What is personal data? It is any data that is from which you are able to identify a person, that this is the identity of the person, the data that reveals the identity of the person. This is regulated, but even beyond that, the sensitive personal data must be safeguarded with greater provision, with greater safeguards. And this health data, including the labs, reports and everything, they are now considered as a sensitive personal data under this DPDP rules. This now makes the hospitals and this lab, insurer, digital health platforms and everyone legally responsible for protecting them, these patient information. If in case of non-compliance, it would lead to penalties. Another provision is that the collection of health data by these service provider is now being restricted. It is now would be done only for clear and specific purpose, not for any general inquiry. There have been lot of safeguards that have been placed regarding the processing of this data, where the central idea is the consent of the individual, the consent of the patient, without whose consent the data cannot be processed. It may be such that certain exemption, as we discussed, have been given in case of emergency surgery being undertaken. In such cases, ex post facto consent might be taken, but otherwise the patient consent has been made central. Digital health system have been ordered to ensure stricter compliance, and in case of any data breaches, there would be penalties, as we discussed. Although laudable, this has raised the concern of the smaller institutions, smaller hospital regarding the compliance cost as well as operational expenditure that would be required to ensure compliance with this DPDP rules. If we discuss the background of this DPDP rule, which is the DPDP Act that came in the year 2023, it has certain laudable provision and it defines certain things. We discussed this personal data has been defined as any data that is relating to an identifiable individual, any data that reveals the identity of an individual. Another degree of which is the sensitive personal data. It has now also defined the idea of processing. Processing of data is required for ensuring greater services, ensuring targeted service delivery. But what is data processing? Data processing is nothing but application of any automated or partly automated operation on any digital personal data. If the data, while that data is being collected, it is being stored, it is being used, it is being shared, if any automated or partly automated operations are being undertaken on that data, it would be considered that the data is being processed. Now, it has also explained, it has also given provision regarding the consent based processing with clear purpose limitation, that this data would be used for processing only for this purpose and not for this purpose. This would have to be clearly demarcated in the terms and condition that the client of those data fiduciary companies would have to adhere to, that they would have to agree to. What are data fiduciaries? Fiduciary is basically a word which means trust. So when somebody becomes a data fiduciary, they actually hold your trust, that you trust them with your data. And while you are trusting them with your data, they are also under the obligation to repose your trust, to uphold your trust by not processing it without any clear purpose, by not processing it for other purposes than they have disclosed. If they are not doing this, then we have a regulatory mechanism in place under this act. What is the regulatory mechanism? We are given the idea of Data Protection Board of India. It is monitoring the compliance and enforcing the penalties. If data fiduciaries, these companies which are using this data, they are not upholding this, they could even impose penalty up to 250 crores for any data breaches that is happening. It is also having the power to inquire and direct remedial action in case of such data breaches. There are certain exemptions, as we discussed, for emergency purposes or for security or public order, sovereignty of the state. For these grounds, some exemptions regarding the consent has been given. However, there are certain concerns that remain with the act regarding the vagueness of definition of idea of security and public order. Also, the concerns regarding the cross-border transmission of data transfer. How the processing would be done in the case of cross-border transfer, that is remains to be seen, and these are the concerns with this act. Moving to the next topic, Pragati. The Pragati portal, it is now in news because Honorable Prime Minister has exhorted the Chief Secretaries of the states to implement Pragati like portal in the respective states to ensure data-backed governance is happening. But what is this Pragati platform? Let's discuss this. While he was catering to a meeting of the chief secretaries, he asked the prime minister asked the chief secretaries of the state to replicate this center's Pragati platform. It is helping to monitor the key infrastructure project and scheme and ensure their timely delivery. This Pragati portal is actually a system that was established for video conferencing. It ensures real-time monitoring of the projects. It was established in the year 2015 and it is ensuring the technology of geospatial mapping, data management, video conferencing from the Prime Minister's office. Prime Minister sitting at his office can talk to various officials responsible for these acts, for these infrastructure projects, and seek real-time review of the progress being made. Any loopholes, any lacunae in those projects could be identified, and right then and there it would be resolved by talking to various ministers responsible for those departments. And it ensures the real-time implementation of the projects. It is actually catering to 340 very critical projects. These 340 projects have been identified by the various ministries as a high priority project for the national development. If we discuss the features of the Pragati portal, Pragati, which sounds for the proactive governance and timely implementation project portal, it has various salient features. For example, it monitors and reviews the key program which are identified by the government of India, and then they address these issues which are flagged by the state government. For example, the state government would be saying that we are not able to build a road because the finance ministry is not clearing the proposal, or let's say the environment ministry is not giving the EIA. If these issues are identified, they are giving built-in features to maintain discussion for follow-up and continuous review. They would ask the minister is responsible or the official responsible and ask for follow-up, like what progress has been done over the period of time in these dimensions. It allows for real-time collaboration because video conferencing with various ministers responsible, it could be done and conducted from the PM office in real-time effort. Thus, it would tackle the bottlenecks that are caused in project by interdependency across government bodies, because a lot of government bodies are related to any government infrastructure project. One would be responsible for digging the ground for, let's say, laying the optical fiber cable. Another Ministry of Road Transport and Highway would be responsible for construction of roads, and then Ministry of Environment might be responsible for the environmental clearance. All of them, these interdependent projects could be seamlessly handled by this Pragati project, by this Pragati portal. And it is a laudable e-governance steps. If we discuss, it can be used as an example in the GS paper 2 regarding the aspect of e-governance, and it has been upholded by the Oxford study. There has been a recent report from Oxford which talks about from gridlock to growth, how leadership enables India's Pragati ecosystem to power progress. As per this report, around 340 projects that were identified by the government, by the year 2023, 17 lakh crore worth of these projects have been significantly expedited in the implementation. Around 50,000 kilometers of national highway have been built. Around twice the number of airports have been doubled in India because of this regular monitoring by the PRAGATI portal. Government identified these 340 wicked projects. Wicked means very challenging projects which were lacking progress from the last a lot of period of time. Government, especially led by the Prime Minister, is able to ensure directly reviewing of their progress, ensuring setting deadlines, ensuring breaking bureaucratic bottlenecks. Thus, it has ensured a culture of accountability. Various famous examples have come forward. For example, a Pakri Barwadi coal mine. It was a mine in Jharkhand. It was delayed since 2006. It shows significant progress after PM Modi's intervention in 2016 and actually led to completion in the year 2019. A project that has been in limbo for 10 years was completed in just 3 years because of the success of PRAGATI portal, because of ensuring inter-ministry collaboration, because of breaking the silos by this portal. And that is why Prime Minister has exhorted the Chief Secretaries of the state to implement certain such level of portal in their respective state to expedite these infrastructure projects. Moving to the last topic, which is INS VAGSHEER. Honorable President Srimati Draupadi Murmu has become the second president to undertake a sortie over a submarine. The first was, of course, President Abdul Kalam, who had a sortie on the submarine Sindhu Rakshak. President Murmu on the other hand has a sortie on the INS VAGSHEER. What is INS VAGSHEER? INS VAGSHEER is basically a diesel electric submarine of the project 75 P75 Scorpion project, under which 6 such submarines were to be built, and this is the 6th submarine that was delivered from the Karwad port in the Karnataka region on the west coast of India. This is the 6th submarine of the 6th Kalvari class submarine that was built. It was launched under the project 75. What is project 75? It was a goal of indigenization of defense technology in India. If you remember, India was earlier ranked as the first largest importer of arms in the world as per the SIPRI report. Later, the rank of India became second because Saudi Arabia became the largest importer of arms in the world. But now, since India is promoting Make in India and is promoting indigenous manufacturing of defense equipments, Indian Navy has upheld this project called Project 75, where we are building indigenous submarines, 6 of which have been built under this Project 75. This INS VAGSHEER is basically the 6th submarine in this regard. The 5 previous submarines have already been have started their operation. The 5 submarines under this project are Kalvari, INS Khanderi, INS Karanj, INS Velar, INS VAGSHEER. Why these famous names? They are actually, this name VAGSHEER actually comes from a sandfish, which is a deadly sea predator of Indian Ocean. So it is, VAGSHEER is nothing but a name of a fish, of the name on which this submarine name has been kept. If we discuss about the features of INS VAGSHEER, it is basically advanced stealth it includes advanced stealth technologies. It has a hydrodynamic design, ensuring stealth operations, ensuring very quietest submarine in the world. It is using very precision guided weapons such as torpedoes and tube launched anti-ship missiles. It is designed for various missions including anti-submarine warfare. It can be used for intelligence gathering also. Thus, it is used for diverse maritime environments. It has various other features also. For example, it has an inbuilt air conditioned plant. It has an integrated Ku band satellite communication system. It has internal communication network with the submarine. With this submarine, India would be able to serve its role as the net security provider in the Indian Ocean region and ensure the security and growth for all as per the Sagar doctrine of Indian government. That was it in this session of Analyst. Please keep reading. Best of luck.